So, what happens when the president, Congress, and the courts all end up in a high-stakes standoff? Well, we're about to see. We're going to dive into one single week back in December 2025 that really put the American system of government through a major stress test.
Okay, so it all kicks off with this pretty stark contradiction. First, on December 3rd, the president is asked about a video. You know, the one from that controversial military strike off Venezuela. He says, whatever they have, we'd certainly release, no problem. Simple enough, right? But then, just 5 days later, he does a complete 180. A reporter brings it up and he cuts them off, saying, I didn't say that, you said that. This is ABC fake news. Wow, that reversal? That's really just the tip of the iceberg for what was going on.
All right, Section 1, a president under pressure. We're looking at the context behind this push for power. And to understand what's happening here, it's helpful to look at the bigger picture. An analysis from Cox Richardson really frames this well. It suggests this is all happening while the president is facing some pretty serious public disapproval and, well, making a real push to consolidate his power.
And the numbers really tell the story, don't they? On that very same day, December 8th, his disapproval rating was up over 56%. So, with his agenda not landing well with the public, it looks like the administration is trying to gain more control. And we're seeing this play out in 3 key battlegrounds: the economy, the courts, and you guessed it, Congress.
So let's start with arena number 1, the battle over tariffs. This is an economic power play that's heading all the way to the Supreme Court. The administration has kicked off a major tariff war, and now the very legal ground it stands on is being put to the test.
So how are they justifying this? Well, the administration's entire argument hinges on this one law, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, or IEEPA. See, back in April, they declared a national economic emergency. That declaration allowed the president to use this act to slap on tariffs all by himself. And that's a big deal, because normally that's a power that belongs to Congress.
Now, with the Supreme Court about to weigh in, the president goes on social media and tries to change the conversation entirely. He starts framing these tariffs not as an economic issue, but as a matter of national security. And you can see his words here: speed, power, and certainty. This is a really clever legal move, right? Because when it comes to national security, courts tend to give the president a whole lot more leeway. But look, this isn't just some abstract legal debate. This has huge, real-world consequences. We're talking about a potential $44 billion loss in net cash income for farmers, just from this one tariff war. That's a staggering number.
And this quote from a farmer, John Bartman, just perfectly captures the feeling on the ground. He's a corn and soybean farmer, and he said, "A bailout is like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. We don't want a bailout. We want markets for our crops." I mean, you can't get much clearer than that. These farmers want stable markets, not government checks.
So what's the administration's response? They announce a new Farm Bridge Assistance Program. But if you look closely, it feels a lot like déjà vu. It's very similar to the $28 billion bailout from the president's first term. And all this talk of a golden age just right around the corner? Well, at the same time, some key inflation reports, which might not look so great, are getting pushed back until January.
Okay, moving on to the second arena, controlling the government. This is all about the push to establish what's known as the unitary executive. Because this fight for power, it isn't just about tariffs and the economy. It goes deeper. It's about who actually gets to control the government itself, specifically those independent agencies that are supposed to operate outside of politics.
And this all came to a head with one specific case, the firing of FTC Commissioner Rebecca Slaughter. Now, she was the last remaining Democratic member on the Federal Trade Commission, and the reason they gave for firing her? Her service was, and I quote, inconsistent with administration priorities. This is a massive deal because it directly challenges a legal precedent that's been around since 1935. That precedent says you can't just fire the head of an independent agency because you disagree with them politically. It has to be for a real reason, like misconduct. So what's the big idea behind this move? It's something called the unitary executive theory. It's a pretty controversial legal theory, and here's the gist of it. It argues that the president has sole, total, unchecked power over the entire executive branch. Think about that. If the courts actually go along with this, it would completely change how American government works. Those independent agencies, they could basically become political tools for the White House.
And you don't have to guess what the president thinks about this. He said it himself, very clearly, back in 2019. I have an Article 2 where I have the right to do whatever I want as president. It's right there in his own words.
And that same idea was put even more bluntly in front of the Supreme Court. The Solicitor General, John Sauer, was arguing the case, and he said that for the president to really be in control, government officials have to be people that they have to fear and obey. Fear and obey. Let that sink in.
Well, that argument got an immediate and powerful pushback from Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. She pointed out the danger here, asking what happens if a president comes in and just fires all the scientists, doctors, and economists and replaces them with political loyalists. Her point was that this is not in the best interest of the citizens of the United States. And really, her question gets right to the core of this whole debate.
Okay, so on to our third and final arena, Congress pushes back. The legislative branch starts to exert its own authority. Because this push for more executive power, well, it's not going unchallenged. Congress is starting to flex its muscles. And what's really interesting is that this is happening on a bipartisan basis.
And this isn't just 1 or 2 members of Congress. We're talking about the Gang of 8. This is the top leadership: House Speaker, Minority Leader, Senate Majority and Minority Leaders, plus the heads of the intelligence committees from both parties. They're the ones who get briefed on the most secret intelligence, and they are all demanding answers about that military strike video we talked about at the beginning. That's a big deal. You just don't see that kind of unified front very often.
And get this, they're not just sending strongly worded letters. They're using their biggest weapon, the power of the purse. Lawmakers have actually slipped a new rule into the massive defense spending bill. And here's what it does. It holds back 25% of the defense secretary's travel money, and he won't get it back until Congress gets its hands on that unedited Venezuela strike video. It's a classic, hardball legislative move.
So when you put it all together, what we're seeing is a real-time, high-stakes stress test of the American system of checks and balances. You've got the fight over economic power with the tariffs, the legal battle over the unitary executive theory in the courts, and now a direct confrontation with Congress over its power of the purse. The outcome of all this could literally redefine the balance of power in the U.S. for years, maybe even generations to come. Which brings us back to the fundamental question. When the powers of the presidency are tested like this, who decides where the limits really are?